I was in the Army, and I signed up for the Army on 9/11. I was 19 years old. I did not know what I was getting myself into, as my dad, a Vietnam vet, alluded to that evening. But I knew that I could make an impact. I did almost 7, so just under 7 years. I ended up in Sadr City, Iraq, split up between 2 camps, FOB Rustamaya and FOB Hope. We nicknamed them both Rocket Maya and No Hope. In 2006, it was deemed the most deadly place on Earth. There was nearly 100% chance that when you left that gate, at some point you were going to get attacked. We joked about he has the PTSDs. We joke about that because we were afraid that what was happening to us was possibly uncontrollable. It made us vulnerable, it made us weak, and that was something that was not accepted.
Trauma is a seriously stressful situation that an individual has experienced where they are having some mental, emotional, sexual, or physical harm. It's important to know that somebody doesn't have to be experiencing something themselves. They can even see it happening and they can be traumatized. PTSD is trauma, but it's separate, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people do think of wars, but PTSD can happen to anyone from a child to an adult, because PTSD is when your body is physiologically, emotionally, mentally reacting to the trauma, and happens after a certain amount of time and for a duration of time.
Trauma itself is the way that you begin to react or respond to the experience that you've had. Yes, it's about what happened, but it's mostly about what happened next.
Some people experience traumatic situations and they don't even realize that they have. So they're walking around and they're anxious, they're depressed, and they haven't made the connection between the things that they're feeling at that point in time and something that happened that in fact was traumatic.
About 10 years ago, I started the process to become a foster parent. I was thinking at the time, probably like somewhere between ages 2 and 5. Instead, I ended up with a 2-month premature baby who was 10 days old. I just felt overwhelmed with joy, not because he was born into the circumstances he was, but because I had the opportunity to love this child and to give him what he needed.
Good morning again.
Having JC with me was almost like starting a new life. When I first got JC, I knew that his mother had a substance abuse problem. I knew that he had cocaine in his stool and that his mother had been hospitalized before she gave birth.
A lot of times when you look at traumatic experiences related to children, we are neglecting those very early days and months of a child's life. If an infant is experiencing some sort of abuse or even some sort of neglect, that is going to have a physiological response as well as a response on their brain development.
After 6 months in my care, JC was taken from me by social services and given to his birth mother, as if he were never taken. And I was devastated. According to the guidelines as a foster parent, you cut ties. I knew that I could not do that. So I think it took maybe no more than 2 weeks before I contacted his mother. And interestingly enough, she sounded almost relieved when she heard from me. We entered into a co-parenting relationship. There was nothing official. I had to give up my foster license, but that meant a lot to me that I was able to stay connected. So those were pretty happy times when we were together. When we weren't together, it was very difficult for me to sleep.
The age-old question, is it nature or is it nurture? What I know is this: where an individual grows up at matters.
In some communities, trauma is happening every day. If it's being normalized, many people aren't going to get the help that they need.
Community trauma is broader than individual or family trauma. It's both incidental and event focused, as well as something that can be historical and chronic. Not everybody who's experienced trauma is violent, but certainly one of the worst outcomes for somebody who's been exposed to violence and trauma is that they can become a perpetrator of violence themselves. People in the justice system are overwhelmingly people who have experienced recent or lifelong trauma.
Community trauma can be any group. Each different group can be impacted by trauma in every different way. Oftentimes when we're addressing trauma, the focus is on the lower income communities. We need to consider all zip codes are impacted by trauma.
We had a very normal, on the outside, middle class childhood. When I was 5, a neighborhood friend played house with me. I remember her locking the door, and I remember her saying, "Don't tell your mom." When I was in 5th grade, we had a band teacher who had been molesting students. I remember watching the news and realizing oh, that happened to me by someone else. And I remember telling my mom, and then we never talked about it again. I think I feel this level of empathy for my mom that makes it hard to separate the bad from the good. And that's what came up when she had too much to drink, was the nasty stuff. It would get to the point where I would ask my mom, please just don't drink on my birthday. Please don't. I don't want to make you a promise that I don't know that I can keep. So I'm not worth more than alcohol.
You go through evaluations, and it was clear to the person administering my evaluation that I was not going to be fit for another tour in combat. I wish that there was another way to express it, but at the time, only anger. It is hard to come back to a normal life and just shut it off. And while the Army taught me and trained me very well on how to go to war, they gave me virtually zero training on how to come home from the battlefield.
They have sort of these two warring parts to themselves. And these men and women have to sort of figure that out on their own. And how do you go from being one thing one day to the very next day being this other thing? They're a complete contrast to one another. That's a really hard thing to do.
In college, because of my mom's relationship with alcohol, I just felt no, there's no way. I won't become that person. And it took 2 weeks. I was on medication for the first time. I'd been diagnosed with anxiety disorder and depression. And then from there started this very tumultuous is probably the word that I would use, journey with men. I started dating an alcoholic. I was drunk. We had been fighting. I didn't consent. And that's how I lost my virginity.
Each trauma for each individual is very unique, but there's something about sexual abuse and sexual trauma. It's a way that a person is objectified, or the desensitization that occurs to their own experience because of that boundary that's been crossed.
I know now that I was raped. It's hard for me though, because I stayed with him. Sometimes I consented, sometimes I didn't. I desired to be loved so badly that I was in a bad situation and just chose to stay anyways. It got to this point where I was like, how did I get here?
Trauma is psychological, but also physiological. So when we experience something, our body reacts to it, and that is imprinted. So when somebody has PTSD, they may have things in their environment, even memories will trigger that system, which is throwing them back into that traumatic experience.
I was having road rage incidents. I was having fights and altercations with people for no reason. I was working 100 hours a week, which was fine because I didn't sleep. My symptoms were starting to creep into every facet of my life and overtake them until I didn't know what to do or how to see my way out of it.
As he started getting older, there was just almost like a switch where he started becoming very aggressive. He would see a lot of domestic violence. My son would come and say, "Hey, Mom, my dad beat up my mom's boyfriend because he was mad." I was in the car with Mama and, we were trying to run my dad over with the car. And that really happened. Then at age 6, my son attempted suicide twice at school. We went to behavioral health and they did hold him for observation. I talked with the attorney that evening to seek emergency custody.
We have an intrinsic bond to the humans that create us, right? And so when there is what we call attachment-based trauma, so a traumatic event that occurs between myself and the people that I'm supposed to be attached to, so moms, dads, caregivers, that can get into a very unique part of our brain and wiring that's different than can what sometimes happen if I survive a car accident, right? Because it's not purposely being put upon me by the human being that is supposed to be my protector.
It's a hard thing when the person who innately is supposed to love you the most, also caused you the most harm. It's hard to believe that anybody can truly love you fully when that person can't.
I learned about my son's diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder through the whole process of him being hospitalized. It was a difficult diagnosis. I had to learn, exceptional children are exceptional. So let me just get over it and do what needs to be done to help him through.
I didn't go to war by myself. I didn't get in gunfights by myself. Got in them with my team. And now guys come back here and they're trying to fight these battles by themselves. It doesn't work. We had 9 guys die in Iraq. We've had 14 suicides since we've been home. More guys have killed themselves than died in war. My company commander killed himself. The lower enlisted guys said, well, if he can't do that, how can I do this? I'm never gonna stop this. So I started burying guys who never made 30. And I said, no more, I'm not doing this.
There's a lot of trauma work that I hesitate to get into with a person if I feel like they don't have a good support system around them. When you leave my office, what's there for you? Now, that doesn't mean for somebody who is really having to do a lot of this on their own, can't be a survivor or accomplish that work. It's just gonna, I'm gonna be honest, it's gonna make it hard. It's just gonna be sort of them doing it on their own. So community is invaluable, in my opinion.
Where it started to shift for me was Justin. I was seeing a therapist. I remember telling her about Justin. And I remember saying yeah, he's nice, but very silly things. His breath smells bad, or this, that, or the other. He's really clingy. He's really needy. I don't know, after that last guy, I was I will not need another human. I won't do it again. She said, I think that you're scared of being with someone that could be good, because if it doesn't work, then what would you think about yourself? She said, I think he could be great for you. She said, it's your homework. You need to go on a date with him. And it took me a month. We went on a date and that was it. Like, I just knew that he was going to be my husband. So I'm at this place where I'm starting to become comfortable with the idea of needing people.
I try to challenge people to think in terms of care receiving, because care receiving requires the interaction from another human being. I think that is far more richer than self-care.
On October 19th is the date that was stamped that the adoption was final. I've seen him grow so much, and I just love when I see those moments, you know, when his eyes are happy and he's safe. He's able to communicate his feelings verbally, and so he can process it now and work through it, which is great. I'm just thankful at this point that we've come this far.
When we talk about educating ourselves, many people are going to go right to online resources and they're going to look up information on, say, specifically PTSD. And they may find that going through information and looking at the checklist that they, in fact, are meeting the criteria for PTSD. And the next question is, what do we do? What would be really important is to reach out to a professional, specifically sites that list psychologists, therapists, psychotherapists in your area that specialize in PTSD or in trauma.
There's a plethora of different treatments, plans, providers, and if you're not happy with any one of them, you absolutely have the power to say, this isn't working for me. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes support.
One of the most important things to do when you're supporting a friend or family member, avoid avoidance. A lot of times we say, okay, I don't want to bring anything up, I don't want to trigger any emotions, but if we avoid, then we're not really helping. You want to be sensitive to what someone's experiencing, but don't be afraid to assess and ask questions to determine where they're at. And then just listen and reassure and validate what they're experiencing so they can know that you're there for them.
We have to be more open as a community about our struggles. We have to be okay to struggle. We gotta get away from the mask.
It was brought to my attention that while I focused on these 14 guys who have committed suicide, there were countless others who failed, like myself. I'd been home from war for 5.5 years. I felt every single day of my life had been overrun by my memories, by my flashbacks, by my dreams when I slept. And I said, I'm never gonna get off this cycle. This is gonna be my life. I'm not gonna live my life like this. So I went to the VA and I got my prescriptions filled. Called my wife on the phone. And I told her that I was tired. Dog tired, and I couldn't do it another day. I apologized to her, and then I started swallowing the pills. By the mouthful. Hundreds. She listened to me drift off, wanting to die. And I woke up, my wife was there. I had just put the one person in this world who hadn't given up on me through probably one of her worst days of her life, because I was not willing to do the dirty work that it took to grow from my experiences. She saw something inside of me worth redemption, that had value. I did not. But I had a lot to live for. I just couldn't see it. When I woke up, and I wasn't dead, It's much like waking up on the battlefield when you're not dead. You better get up and fight. Someone's probably gonna try to kill you again. It just might be yourself. There's only one thing that can bring you out of the dark, and that's the light. Many civilians ask me, how can I help veterans? Is there an organization I can give my money to? The truth is, I'd much rather you give your time to a local veteran that you can go talk to, and there's plenty of places to do it. The more interactions we have, the smaller that gap gets, the bigger the bridge gets, the easier it is to have empathy, the easier it is to connect and relate to someone.
I think that to be in community with people, like real community, they don't just get like the buttoned up version of you, they have to get all of you. I feel that I've reached a place where like I just can't be quiet about it anymore. I have my story. And if I'm quiet about it, if I'm ashamed of it, I don't really know how it helps other people. If 17-year-old Tori had had a 27-year-old Tori, maybe she would have missed the whole story that I just told you.
I think a lot of times we have the societal victim where it's a little bit of the like, oh, poor them. You know, or it's almost like they're given a pass or an excuse, or they're seen as broken. That just flies all over me to even say it, because usually they're very much not victims but survivors. These people are resilient. We have no idea the work that they've had to go through, the internal struggle and pain, and then to see them come out on the other side, I'm like, they're like titans. And it gives people a little framework, because sometimes I got to do hard work in my office, right? And it's like, no. It's never going to be as bad as that. You have survived that.
Early on, I really wasn't sure and couldn't really get a straight answer from anyone. Like, can he recover from this? And then I realized that no one can give me that answer. It's just going to take time. And I see he can more than recover. And he is recovering.
I am constantly striving to be the best version of myself. I love my mom. I don't think that she felt like she was strong enough to be who I needed her to be. But I can be that. Like, I know that I can be that.
I don't have a rifle anymore, but my fight is no different, and I fight with the same vigor I did in Soldier City. I know that my enemy is a complicated one, and that means that I have to do my work to make sure that I'm victorious.